So the Canon 5D Mark IV was announced in 2016, and by today it would mean that it's a 5 to 6 year old camera, and in camera terms, that's a really long time. It's a really old, and it's like a dinosaur at this point. However, despite its age and a lot of other fantastic cameras coming out like the R5 and R6, I still think that this Canon 5D Mark IV is still going to be a fantastic option in 2021-22 or whenever you're watching this, as a professional camera that will give you incredible results for both photo and video. And today we're going to be talking about why I think you should be picking up this camera. So the camera has been out for a while, and obviously the specs are out there, but I will say a few things that kind of stand out to me. The first obviously being that it's a 30 megapixel sensor, which in my opinion is the sweet spot for everybody. It obviously has the fantastic Canon dual pixel autofocus. It has a touchscreen, it shoots 7 frames per second, it has a 61 autofocus point system. On the video side, it shoots up to 4K DCI. However, the 4K is pretty much non-existent to me because of the file bloat size, but I'll talk about it later. It shoots up to 120p slow motion, but that's only in 720. It's obviously weather sealed, which is a big deal for a lot of people. One of the more interesting things on the side for video is that it was the first sort of consumer camera that provided C-Lock. Even at that point, the 1DX Mark II did not have C-Lock. And obviously one of the best things, it also has dual card slots. So this video isn't so much an in-depth review, but rather a discussion on why I think the camera is still worth it. However, I do want to say one thing before we start, and that is, when you look at the Canon 5D Mark IV, there is nothing special or inherently unique about the camera. Even in 2016 when it came out, there was nothing, that made it stand out from its competitors. However, the reason why I think, at least the main reason why I think the Canon 5D Mark IV is still worth it and it holds a very special place in my heart, is because as a professional workhorse camera, it is a camera that just works. And really, I find it hard to find any other higher praise to a professional camera than that. The camera really does inherit a legacy that's very difficult to overtake. The Canon 5D Mark II was, a class of its own. The 5D Mark III produced, kind of topped that 5D Mark II, not incredibly, but significant in its own way. And the 5D Mark IV being the last of its kind, at least in my opinion, I don't think Canon's going to produce the 5D Mark V. It does have quite a huge weight on its shoulders to carry, and I still think it does that. It still holds up that legacy pretty well. So the first thing I want to talk about is obviously going to be the image quality for photos. And in my opinion, image quality isn't something I harp on a lot, because whatever camera you buy now, Canon, Nikon, Sony, any camera above like 2015 onwards, you're going to get fantastic results. And it's the same with the Canon 5D Mark IV. I'll be putting a lot of sample images throughout this entire video so you can judge from there. But in my opinion, the file sizes are amazing. Obviously, as I mentioned, the 30 megapixels is just enough resolution for me to crop, but still remain like that manageable file size if I shoot like a lot of photos. The dynamic range, I know a lot of people want to complain about it, comparing it to other cameras. However, for me, dynamic range isn't like a big deal, because with digital files, it's easy to like bring up the dynamic range, or if you need to, you can always like blend images and things like that. So not a really big deal for me, but obviously get the beautiful Canon colors, very easy to color. The skin tones are amazing. The image quality overall is just fantastic. And obviously, yes, you are going to get noise at 6400, so that's not something that I'm super huge fan of. However, when I bring it out for food, I bring it out for fashion, I bring it out for a commercial job, whatever that I bring this camera to, it does produce amazing results for it. So if you're worried about image quality, don't worry, you're still gonna get amazing images out of this like 5 to 6 year old camera. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people think happens, is that when a new camera comes out, yeah, technically the new cameras are better, but the camera sensor doesn't physically change. It's still just as good as it was when it came out of the factory. And the 5D Mark IV was built for professionals, and it's still going to have that professional quality, so don't worry about image quality. So next I want to talk about the thing that interests me the most, and that is the ergonomics of the camera. As I mentioned before, image quality not really a big deal. It's really the usability and overall how this camera works and feels that is more important to me, and why I choose certain cameras and why I still choose to stick with DSLRs. I made a video about why I'm still shooting with DSLRs in 2021. If you're interested in checking that out, link is somewhere here or in the description. But the 5D Mark IV remains to this day one of my favorite feeling cameras of all time. I own the C70, the 1DX Mark III, and a lot of other cameras that I've tried out, but nothing really beats the 5D Mark IV. And the reason for this is because the grip on it just curves extremely well. It's just deep enough to have a comfortable grip, and if you add like a battery grip, it does feel like a much more beefier camera. But the camera on itself alone, just like this, is more than enough for most people. It feels very comfortable to use. It feels very confident in your hands. There is one downside I will say about the ergonomics, and that is the lack of a flip screen. At first, it wasn't really a big deal to me, because to me, like, flip screens were always a bit amateurish to me. But as I progressed in my career, I realized that a fixed screen is not really that good. It limits a lot of potential for you to grab images like down, below, or on top, or just like portrait orientation, things like that. I would have liked it if it had like a tilt or flip screen. I know the 60 Mark II has, but I think the 5D Mark IV is much better than the 60 Mark II. So yeah, the fixed screen is probably the only downside that I can think the camera has. However, the rest of it, like the touchscreen, super intuitive touchscreen, like just to tap to focus and things like that, changing the menu, everything, you can function very, very well with just the back of the screen. The way the buttons are placed are amazing. Obviously, you have the incredible rate button that I think most cameras don't even have. I know the R5 and R6 had, but the R didn't have. I love the rate button. It's very, very helpful. The start and stop button for recording is amazing. Really, really nice and beefy. Unlike the 1DX Mark II and 3, which is very small, so sometimes I actually mispress on my 1DX3, but it's a very nice button just to switch between photo and video. Very nice. Obviously, it has all the buttons that are methodically laid out, very nice dials and things like that. So in terms of ergonomics and just the physical feel of the camera, the way everything is laid out with the buttons and all, this is one hell of a camera that to this day, every time I pick it up, I just love shooting with it, because the weight makes it such a joy and pleasure to shoot with. So next I want to talk about the card solutions, and this is where I think the 5D Mark IV kind of fails a little bit. It has the CF card as well as an SD card, and I think Canon did a wrong choice to actually have this. I would personally prefer if both card slots were the same, like either both CF cards or both SD cards, and the main reason for this is because I don't like to have multiple card systems. I have to buy like a CF card and buy SD card, and I can't, like, I have to have different sorts of formats, which is a pain in the ass to handle. I do think it was mainly because of the upgradability of the 5D Mark IV. Most people that are going to be switching to the 4 was going to be coming from the 3, and with the 3 it already had the CF card, it already had the SD card, and it just made sense financially, I guess, if you were going to use the same kind of cards from the 3 to the 4. So it was a seamless transition. And also, CF cards are getting really, really difficult to find because, well, nobody uses the format anymore. It's either CF Express, CFast 2.0 and things like that. So if you are thinking of picking up this camera, just keep in mind that you probably can't find, or it's probably going to be really difficult to find these CF cards anymore. Now let's talk about autofocusing system, and this is where the 5D Mark IV also takes a hit and miss. I'll first talk about the dual pixel autofocus because that's my favorite method to focus on this camera. I don't really use the viewfinder much anymore, and mainly because it has the traditional DSLR face detection system, which is a hit and miss depending on what lens you have on it. Obviously, if you're going to compare it to like the R5, R6 with like the eye detection, yes, those do have much better autofocusing system, but those also use different processors, and they are much newer, developed dual pixel autofocusing systems. So you are going to get a little bit more refinement and a little bit more control with the DPF on those newer mirrorless cameras. But still, on the 5D Mark IV, there is literally nothing wrong, and it's way better than the original 3, 2 or the older generations that didn't have dual pixel. You have that fantastic face detection autofocusing system that I always use. You can tap to focus and things like that. It's extremely accurate, and it's much more accurate than the DSLR, the viewfinder focusing system. And which leads me to the next part, which is that 60. Yes, it does have a 61-point autofocusing system. However, in my experience, it hasn't really been that useful because unfortunately the 5D Mark IV is sort of plagued in the fact that it is still based on an EF system, EF lens system. And the problem with this is because like the autofocusing motors on some of the EF glass, like the 51.2, amazing lens, but notoriously slow and misses quite a lot if you're using the DSLR, the viewfinder phase detection. And all the lenses are just going to have the lower hit rate, and so that's something you got to keep in mind. It's not to say that it's terrible. It does work. It's just that I have more confidence in dual pixel AF, and it's just so much easier when you can tap to focus and things like that. I just don't use the viewfinder much anymore. So let's move into the video quality, and the video quality was also another thing that I think a lot of people were very disappointed in the camera. Coming from like the 5D Mark III, I think a lot of people wanted like, you know, really good 4K, wanted super slow motion, and Canon sort of provided it in their own way. Unfortunately, the 4K on this camera uses a motion JPEG format, which if you're not so familiar with, basically is an inefficient way of saving file sizes, because I think on a 64 gig card you can get about like 10 minutes. So don't consider this camera as a 4K camera, but it's 1080, it's actually pretty good. Yes, it's going to be a little bit softer because it's an older tech. However, it still holds up very well, and I still do shoot a lot of video on the 5D Mark IV. I'll just show a couple of clips here and there. It does produce really nice, smooth skin tones, smooth video. Yes, of course, if you crop in, it's going to be a little bit soft, of course. But one of the upsides of like upgrading from the 5D Mark III, it does shoot 1080 60p. It does shoot 120, however, it shoots it at like 720, and in my opinion, it's like heavily over sharpened, so I don't really use that feature unless I really need it. But the 120p on this isn't super great. However, one thing that was very surprising for the 5D Mark IV was the inclusion or the availability of C-Lock for the camera. C-Lock was a paid upgrade. You couldn't do it yourself. You had to actually send it into Canon to unlock the firmware in the camera. It's a little bit pricey. It was like 500 bucks here in Malaysia, which was pretty expensive. But it did unlock a lot more capabilities of the camera. So I do want to wrap up this video with a couple of quick thoughts about the Canon 5D Mark IV, and as I said at the beginning, there is nothing inherently special about it. The gear side of me, that, you know, I love camera gear, I love all this kind of tech stuff. When I look at it, right, I don't shoot with it. You know, there's nothing unique about it, there's nothing special about it. But from a working perspective, from an everyday shooter, every time I pick up this 5D Mark IV, it just works, and there's this feeling of confidence, there's this feeling of familiarity, there's this feeling of reliability every single time I pick up the camera. It just molds into my hand. It just feels like every time I take a photo, I know I got the shot. It's a good blend of image quality and ergonomics and reliability and all these things, and each part on its own doesn't really stand out or it's nothing special, but when you combine all these things, just like a good dish, you know, when everything just comes together, it becomes something that's close to perfection. And I think that even today in 2021, 2022, or whenever you're watching this, the 5D Mark IV is still going to be a fantastic option, you know, even more if you consider like the cost of it going down. The used cost of it is going to be a extreme value for you. The battery cost isn't going to be super high, the media cost isn't going to be super high. You can get a lot of great EF lenses used, and so in a lot of ways, in overall, this provides way more value than the R5 or the R6 with their incredible specs could give you in terms of like a money making machine, in terms of a camera that just works, I am extremely happy with the 5D Mark IV, and I think even if you pick it up today, you probably will be too.